Welcome to SBCA's Lumber Connection podcast, where we discuss today's market and explore tomorrow's trends. Here's our host, Molly Butts.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of Lumber Connection. This week I'm in the studio with special guest Stinson Dean. Stinson is a seasoned lumber trader and new owner of Revol Building Solutions. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Molly, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about my history in lumber trading and how folks in that CM space can really utilize markets and futures and hedging. So thanks for having me.
That's awesome. Stinson, you're new to our Lumber Connection. Obviously, this is the first time we've had you on, and I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you got to the place that you're at today.
Sure. So my start in commodities was at a company called StoneX, which is technically called an FCM, a futures commission merchant, where they brokered access to the futures markets. By the time I got involved about 10 years ago, it was really about consulting. So I was consulting in the lumber space about how to utilize futures, education around futures, market intel, and kind of talking to all the players in the supply chain, from home builder end users to sawmill producers and everyone in between. And I kind of dumbed into that job, but it led to just being welcomed in and embraced by the lumber industry. It's a great group of folks. And from there, I went to work for one of my consulting clients as a wholesaler, buying and selling lumber, back-to-backing loads from the mill, taking positions in distribution or warehousing, and reloading lumber, and all the while using futures to price that. Then I moved into apartment job quoting lumber packages for apartments, and I was deeper in the supply chain than I am now. And I really got to exercise risk management around, hey, we need a lumber package, and that price needs to be good for 8 months before we start, and then another 3 months while we build out the whole project. So I've kind of progressed from consulting, lumber wholesaling, retailing, to now Revol Building Solutions and running a component plant myself.
Great. I appreciate that background. I think that sets a little bit of the stage for where we're headed today. If our listeners haven't quite gotten there yet, Stinson, you have been heavily involved in the futures market previously, currently, and I'd like to take us on a little bit different journey than we might normally take on a Lumber Connection. There's a lot of mystery, I think, probably. Mystery might not be the right word, but that's where I go, surrounding the futures market. And I'm hoping today we can demystify that a little bit through our conversation. Obviously, you have history and experience, and I look forward to where we're headed. So let's just start with the basics in case anyone's really unsure. Can you just, in a sentence or two, answer the question, what is the futures market?
The futures market is all market participants' expectations of where price will be in the future relative to the price that they can buy today. So it's a contract that you can buy it for delivery, in a May or July, or you can sell it to make delivery in May, July, September. Contracts are every other month. So it's a free and open marketplace to decipher future price expectation.
Well, that gets us off on the right foot to understand where we're headed. And I think, one of the things that goes along with maybe not totally understanding the futures market is the risk that might be associated, because you're talking about basically an unknown at some point in the future. I think that can feel potentially a little scary or intimidating, but I'd kind of like to take a little bit different approach. And you tell me, let's talk about how getting into the futures market might actually help you mitigate some risk with regard to lumber purchasing.
Yeah. So when I was a consultant, I would get a lot of futures are risky and what's a margin call, and you got to put money in, and the quote unquote moves against you. You got to put more money in. And the way I learned to explain it is by not utilizing futures against your inherent business risk, you're just going completely naked. You got forward jobs quoted 6 to 8 months out. Do you have the balance sheet to buy 100% of the lumber today you probably quoted off today's pricing? Most people don't operate that way. It kind of burns a hole in your balance sheet and you just have inventory not turning. So if you're not utilizing futures, you're betting that prices are going to go down or stay the same by the time you need to buy lumber for that job. And so understanding that you have risk on right now is the first step. And the second step is the realization of why people think futures are quote unquote risky, is because you feel the pain right away, every single day, where if you go long a futures contract and the market falls the next day $30, like you have to pay in $30 1,000. And that's painful and that hurts. And if you don't understand why, what the broader program is, that can seem risky. The reality is it's like a mark-to-market valuation of your book in a way that doesn't happen with your forward contract commitments. It depends if you have a dynamic banking relationship, but most banks in our space don't require you to bring your contract commitments that you have committed to deliver lumber in the form of whatever component or raw, to bring that to market as if you had to deliver it today. And if that happened, you would view your risk, I think, completely different. And that's what futures does, is every day, even though the contract doesn't expire for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 8 months, every day, you know your current market position. And that is also happening with your old school typical commitments that you're making. You just don't have to market the market every day. So understanding you're taking the risk, and if you have futures offsetting it, the mechanics of that hedge, when fully understood against a forward commitment in your normal course of business, it becomes a lot less risky. And you understand that on one side of the ledger, you're committing lumber you don't own at a price you don't know where you're going to buy it at, against a futures contract, which you do know exactly what you bought it at. And that space between, we call basis in our lumber trading world and commodity trading in general, that basis is what you have to track. And when you put both those pieces together and you marry a forward commitment to your customer with a futures position today, then it all makes sense to me.
Okay. So I think that gives us a little bit better understanding of where the potential risk might lie, but also how you can use some of that. I mean, put more succinctly, I think there isn't as much risk because you're paying for something now and you know exactly what it's going to cost when you go to collect.
Exactly. And I don't know if the explanation was that great, but it's like where you got to define your risk. And right now, without using any futures, you have upside risk. If prices go up between now and when you made that commitment, when you had to deliver on that commitment, you're in trouble. You got issues, you got margin compression, whatever it is. And most folks in this world, in this audience, are going to be net short. They're always going to be committing more than the lumber inventory they own. So to supplement that, you need to offset your risk. Well, that's going long in the futures market. So you have offsetting risk. If you're long in futures and price goes down, well, that means you picked up some margin on your forward commitment and vice versa.
So, okay. I love the old, someone's got something they want to tell you and they say, do you want the good news first or the bad news? And I tend to go for the good news first because I think that helps lessen the blow, whatever the bad news might be. So we're going to go with positive first, which is if you were participating in the futures market, what's one way that you see you could really win? What's a win? And what does that look like and feel like?
So once you really understand futures, you embrace volatility. And the gyrations in the futures market are, as in lumber futures, are as big as any other commodity. When lumber was doing its thing during COVID, I spoke with other commodity trader friends and a lot of in other markets, and their jaw was dropping about how volatile lumber was during that time and then also historically. And when you understand hedging, it gives you a chance when futures are mispriced, like maybe there's some panic in the market, there's no tariff announcement on Liberation Day, so all the air comes out of the futures market, but maybe it overcorrects to the downside, and you're benchmarking off of a $600 per thousand cost, just saying Chicago futures, which is what we all look at, and you're marking it up, whatever your markup is, and you have those quotes out, well, all of a sudden, before you have the commitment from the customer, the futures fall $100. Like maybe you give some of that back. But if it happens quick enough, the broader marketplace isn't reacting that quickly, you can buy your futures contract and that volatility went in your favor. Of course, if it goes $100 up, you got to have quick and expedient conversations with your customers about where these quotes are going to go. But volatility, when it's in your favor, you can get real aggressive on your pricing, lock it in, and there'll be a window there that savvy marketers will use. And the window closes because savvy participants are in there buying the value that the volatility delivered.
So I kind of know where you're going to go, but for the sake of argument, let's go to the other side of that then. The bad news is that you have the potential to lose as well, maybe lose big. But let's just say lose. What does that look like when you're working in the futures market?
Yeah, so when you're a hedger, the number one rule is don't lose money. That's what I was taught in the first day of my consulting career. So you could lose money if you look at it in a silo on the futures on your futures position, because again, most folks in this audience are going to be going long futures. Okay, and futures fall $100 because tariff was canceled. There's a softwood lumber agreement with the Canadians that reduces the duty, whatever. Prices fall and you already went long. Well, why did you go long? Well, you went long because you already had a commitment with your customer that had a profit margin above and beyond your futures position. And you learn how to use futures to quote things. So the bad news is you have $100 quote unquote loss. You bought at 600, now it's marked to 500, and you got to pay all along the way. But what you really need to do is reduce your purchasing budget for that commitment by $100. So you just improve the margin on your forward commitment by 100 to offset your $100 loss on the futures. So it's a wash, and that's the definition of hedging. That's the theory. The reality, Molly, is it's going to feel like you're lost a lot when you got to pay $100 1,000. I mean, this move the other week was in 3 days. You had to come up with $70 1,000, $20 1,000, $10 1,000, and it's one truckload per contract. If you have a large multifamily on, you're talking 100, 125 contracts if you're just hedging the whole thing. And $100 move on a margin call. I got to pull up my calculator. I should know this better, but 27.5 thousand board feet per contract times $100 move is every contract's $2,750. In that $100 move times 120 truckloads, that's $330,000 you had to fund in a matter of 3 days. And that is painful. And there's a reason it's painful. It's by design, because if you can't hang in there, you're going to blow out your position. And that typically comes around the bottom of a market when folks capitulate. So yeah, that is the double-edged sword, is the cash planning, cash management. You got to reserve cash on your balance sheet, liquid cash to be able to fund these margin calls. And in theory, it's easy to say, well, hey, I got a $330,000 savings on buying my lumber. In the real world, because I have a $330,000 loss in my large futures position. And that's not tenable for a lot of folks. And that's why a lot of folks don't do it. But if you got the cash, it makes a lot of sense. But that is the dark side, and the part that's tough to swallow. If you're the risk manager and you're sending notes to your CFO that, hey, I need a $178,000 transfer to my margin account, and everyone's not on the same page, that's when folks get in trouble.
So interestingly, you've sort of led me to where I'd like for us to sort of wrap up. And I hate to even say those words because I think we could probably spend a couple hours really exploring this. And I hope we'll have some opportunities in the future. But for today's episode, based on the last thing that you said, if a person does have the capability to do this, and we've piqued their interest today in just giving some more information than maybe they've had historically, how do you go about getting involved in the futures market? I'm pretty certain you can't just call the, Chicago Mercantile Exchange and say, hey, sign me up. So what are some first steps that a component manufacturer could take to head down that path?
Yeah, so you have to open a futures trading account, and there's only particular amount of futures brokers that deal in lumber futures because they can be pretty volatile. And if you're not a hedger, it can be pretty risky for all the reasons we've talked about. Imagine having a $330,000 loss and no forward commitment to offset it. So a hedger is easier to get an account open with. I'm happy to point some folks in the right direction. There are a handful of very good brokers across a handful of future broker companies that are really plugged in, work across the supply chain, the place I used to work at. So you got to go through an account opening process, which is a bit of a bear because it's a lot of KYC stuff, passports, foreign influence, foreign cash, blah, 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 all that stuff. It takes a little while. And I always encourage people just to bite the bullet, get it open, and then you don't have to do anything. But when you do want to do something, your account's open. So you got to find a futures broker, and I'm happy to point folks in the right direction.
Awesome. Thank you. So, all right. The last thing I want to ask you is you've gotten into a big office building, you've stepped into the elevator, and someone says, tell me one thing about futures. And that's what's the takeaway? What's the one thing you would give in your elevator speech about the futures market that would either, probably the thing that would get someone interested just in a couple sentences?
Sure. I think the savviest owners know when to take advantage of the futures market. And they embrace volatility. And the only place to move quickly enough is the futures market, because all you got to do is click some buttons on your keyboard and you've bought an unlimited amount of lumber. And so, futures, if I'm getting ready to get off this elevator, futures gives you the tool to act as quickly as possible to manage your risk.
Awesome. Stinson, I think that wraps up our episode for this week, but thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed our time together, albeit brief, and I look forward to the next installment of Lumber Connection.
Thanks, Molly. Appreciate it.
This has been a Lumber Connection podcast by SBCA. If you have a question you'd like a guest to answer on a future podcast, send it to podcast@sbcacomponents.com.